Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Audi Cycling YouTube channel, where today I'm going to be taking a look at the Velogames Brabantse Pijl. Once again looking at the Superclasico, the classic squad game and the women's race as well. And this is a bit of a different competition because there's no really expensive riders like your Van der Poels and your Pogacars and your Wout van Aerts, which means that this is a bit more of an interesting and open race, and therefore I've got a few more suggestions to be kind of giving you guys, and I think there's going to be quite a lot of different team variations which could do well in this race. So let's talk through some of the riders to see who are probably going to be the best ones to be going with. The most expensive rider is Arnaud Delis, which I'm not convinced is going to be a particularly good choice. Delis just hasn't quite hit the heights that he did last year. He had a pretty good start to the season, but hasn't quite lived up to that. This isn't like the highest quality start list going, so perhaps he could do better, but at 26 I just think that there are better choices which are cheaper than him. I also think that this is a competition where you don't need to use all 100 credits to be creating the winning team. I think it's very possible that you could be selecting the top 6 riders and that doesn't cost you 100 credits. So don't be afraid of using less than 100 credits. I think that it could work out quite well for you. And, the team which I have at the moment is worth 96, so I'll show you that in a little bit. But anyway, Pijl, probably not a great choice either. He just doesn't suit this race massively. Hasn't looked in that good form recently. I can't even remember what the last race Pijl did was, to be honest with you. Kuznetsov, I think, is quite good. He has been very consistent in this race, and especially since we're coming up to the Amstel Gold Race, which is taking place this weekend. Remember last year he was rolled to the line in the bike throw by Kwiatkowski, so I'm sure that he'll be coming into some good form to try and avenge his kind of second place that he got last year. And he was also 16th at Flanders. He was in that leading group, which he was dropped from, but that is a good inclination that he is coming into some good form. And he does have this ability to really pull out some good one-day performances in these kind of, not like monuments, but like other one-day races. So I think Kuznetsov is a good one. He was up there last year as well. I think it's going to be a slightly rainy and windy day, and he was up there last year, which was a really biblical addition. So I think that Kuznetsov is pretty safe. Hater just doesn't do that great in one-day races, so I'd say probably stay clear of him. Ineos just haven't looked that great, and their team is pretty young and inexperienced, so I'm not sure about just anyone on Ineos really being that good. Even Sheffield, who won last year, he hasn't quite hit the heights as he did last year, which is a shame really, because I'm a big fan of Sheffield. Dylan Teuns similarly, I think that probably they have some other options who'd be better. Teuns just hasn't, again, hit the heights of last year where he was like, winning La Flèche Wallonne and stuff like that. He just hasn't quite seemed on that kind of level. Mollema, similarly, this race doesn't suit him massively. I think that he wasn't looking that good in, I think it was Catalonia was his last race, or it might have been Basque Country. But either way, he wasn't really making that many, he wasn't impacting the races particularly, so I don't think he's that good either. Trentin, on the other hand, he was the leader at Roubaix, and I think he finished top 20 there. But you have to consider that without the kind of upper echelon riders, Trentin's kind of favourite status has increased as a consequence of that, and therefore Trentin could be a pretty good choice, considering that UAE don't have like that many other riders who I think have going to be making that much impact on the race. I think that Trentin's pretty safe. You also have to consider that in 2021 he finished third in this race behind Pidcock and Wout van Aert, so he knows how to do well in this race. Greg hasn't looked that great. Coquard did well in this little French stage race. I can't remember the name of it. I know that's kind of offensive, but I can't remember the name of it. But he did pretty good there. He was winning a couple of stages, but he was dropped on the final stage, so maybe. He has finished 4th in this race in the past, so he knows how to do this race. He's competed a lot of times. Hershey hasn't looked good since, like, I don't know, 2020, to be honest with you, which is a bit harsh, but I don't know. He just hasn't looked that great. I think it's just too much of a risk for 18. Søren Kragh, on the other hand, I think he's pretty good. When you consider that he looked good at MSR and E3, but he DNF'd Flanders, but that's because, like, Van der Poel, like, knackered him by basically like forcing him to chase back the group at the start. So I think that Søren Kragh could probably be the leader for Alpecin, especially when you consider that Quinten Hermans, their other guy, didn't look good at Basque Country in comparison to my expectations, and therefore I think Søren Kragh could be the better option for them. And if it is a slightly rainy day, and if it's like a solo winner, then I think Søren Kragh could certainly be that guy. Fred Wright crashed at Roubaix, so just be wary about picking him. Covey hasn't looked that great recently, neither has Narsson. Paulus, I think, is probably the rider who you have to put on I think he's my strongest recommendation, just because 5th at Flanders, 3rd at Dwars coming into the Ardennes, which suit him even more than the Cobble Classics. I think that Paulus is almost a rider who you have to be putting onto your team. Turns, not a bad shout, to be honest with you. I think that Trek have quite an open team, and Turns could certainly on his day finish inside the top 10. 14-point riders, I really like the combination of Bajoli and Schmidt. Both looked really good at Basque Country. Although Quickstep couldn't quite decide who they were sprinting for, but Schmidt finished like 4 times in the top 10. Bajoli was also looking really fast, and without Alaphilippe here, both of them have a really good chance of getting a good result. So I'm high on both of those guys. Sheffield just hasn't looked that great. Schuns usually does alright in this race, very consistently finishes inside the top 20. Corbin Strong is probably the best option for Israel Premier Tech. I think recently, I think it was in Catalonia, he finished in the top 5 a couple of times in some sprints, and also in the recent Miguel Indurain one-day race, which a lot of the Basque Country riders, they went on to do Basque Country. He didn't go on to do Basque Country, but he did look pretty good in that race. I think he finished 7th. Simon Clark hasn't raced in a little bit, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I would recommend Alexander Camp, but I don't think he's racing anymore. He's not on the PCS start list anymore, so just be sure to check that if you are going to pick him. I think that he would be a good choice if he is taking part. Cron, very similar to Corbin Strong actually, in that he competed in that Miguel Indurain one-day race, but he also didn't compete in Basque Country. So those two are a little bit unknown, but they look good in that race. So it would make sense that they'd probably do well in this race, considering that the riders who did well in that one-day race went on to do quite well in Basque Country. So Cron and Strong, probably pretty decent ones. Bentola hasn't looked that great, but I would like to recommend him. Simmons, similarly, has a lot of hype around his one-day ability, but hasn't quite shown it yet. Gianni Vermeersch just finished 11th at Roubaix. Perhaps this kind of style of Ardennes race suits him a little bit more. 10-point riders, honestly, I don't really like many of them, apart from maybe Marlene van den Berg, but that's a little bit of a long shot, to be honest with you. 8-point riders, Cavagna could be a little bit of a maverick pick. He was looking pretty sprightly in Basque Country, getting him a breakaway quite a bit. He would be a good rider which Quickstep might ping off the front, for example. Then who else is there? There's maybe Chris Neylands, because he was looking good at E3. Maybe he might be a leader here. Van Hills is probably the best 8-point rider, second behind Caden Groves at the Volta Limburg Classic recently. So him and Klon I'd expect to be big animators in this race for Lotto Destiny. And then moving into the 6-point riders, you might be needing some of these guys, but you can make a team without them. Busato's a pretty good one. If you remember back to the Muscat Classic in Oman, earlier this year, he finished in 4th place in the sprint there. He's a quite a good puncher actually, and he rides for their development team, but he regularly gets brought up to the elite team. So I think that Busato's a really interesting one. I'd be interested to see how he goes in this race. Arguably, Ben Healy could be the best 6-point rider. If you look back to this the Coppa i Bartoli stage race, he did really good there, and then he also won the one-day race. I can't remember what he was called, but he's in some really good form, and he's in a contract here, so I think that he's really determined to make some big statement performances this year, and I think that he's in some good form at the moment, and it wouldn't surprise me if he finishes really well in this race. So Ben Healy, for me, is easily the best 6-point rider. Madis Mikkels was in that front group at Roubaix until his tyre fell off on Arenberg, so I think that he is still quite a good one to be thinking about. Sean Quinn won a stage in that Coppa i Bartoli stage race, so again, another one. EF seemed to have a lot of options in this race, as James Shaw was also good in that race, so you could stack up on EF riders. I think that's not a bad shout. And then 4-point riders, I don't think you should need any 4-point riders, but if you do, I would probably go with Rick Plumers, who's kind of like a sprinty type. He was in the Jumbo-Visma Development Academy, but now he's riding for Tudor, and he's pretty good. I'm not sure whether he'd finished top 20, maybe top 30, so that's not a bad one. Outside of him, Jacob Scott usually gets in breakaways quite a bit. He did in the Tour of Britain a lot in the British scene, so quite a good one for banking on the breakaway. Or you could go for your assist points on the quick step boys with Martin Svercek, the regen Peter Sagan. This is the team that I'm going with at the moment. It's 96 credits. In terms of what I might do, I might even put in Ben Healy as a 6-point rider. I might put in Trent in as well. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of in terms of my Superclasico team. I'm quite happy with it, but I think there's a lot more alternatives that you could go with, so be sure to put those in the comments below. But now let's take a look at the classic squad game. So in terms of a classic squad game, I haven't made any alterations yet. Rather unfortunately, I took Philipsen off my team for Roubaix, which was a real blunder. But I do have Paulus in my team ready to go. If I was to make any alterations, it would probably be to put in Kuznefroid, because he is going to be doing a lot of these upcoming races, including Brabantse, Pijl, Amstel Gold Race, La Flèche Wallonne and Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So if you're going to pick riders, pick ones who are going to be doing quite a lot of these Ardennes races. I think Andreas Kron is also doing all of them, so he would be another good one to be putting on. I think Paulus is a really good one to be putting on as well. There's some good 6-point riders as well. Badjoli and Schmidt are both 6-point riders in this competition, so both of those would be good ones who I'm all considering to be putting on. I just haven't made any of the alterations just yet. I think I've got 8 transfers left to use, and I'm planning on using 2 of those on like Pogačar and Pidcock, so that takes me down to 6. So I'm trying to pick riders who are definitely going to be taking a part in as many of these races as possible. But some of the start lists for like Liège and La Flèche Wallonne haven't released yet, so I'm kind of holding out to see if there are going to be some more announcements before I fully select my team. But then looking into the women's race, I found this one to be really easy to make actually. I just went with 3 SD Works riders in Vollering, Reuser and Bledevold. Bledevold's won some race recently, and pretty much SD Works just dominate races. I think Reuser could win solo. Vollering's more of like a puncher type. She won it last year, so those were pretty easy choices. Lucinda Brandt and Van Androoy, because if SD Works don't win, then it's usually Trek Segafredo, and Brandt and Van Androoy provide the best options for Trek. And then we've got Elise Shabby, who's looked pretty decent recently, but suits the Ardennes style of racing a bit more than the cobbled races, so she was a pretty easy pick to be putting in there. The only thing that I might do is put in more SD Works riders. That would be the only real alternative. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. What are you planning on doing for all of your teams? How many transfers have you got left? That kind of thing. And all that is left to say is to stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!